Have you ever looked in the mirror and quietly wondered, is my life slowing down or is it already over? Most people think turning 70 means life becomes smaller, less energy, less excitement, less purpose. The world moves fast, and suddenly, older people begin to feel invisible. But what if that belief is completely wrong? What if your 70s could become the most meaningful years of your life? What if happiness after 70 has nothing to do with money, perfect health, or luck, and everything to do with a few simple daily habits? Today, I want to tell you the story of a man who believed his best years were behind him, until 7 small habits changed everything. And by the end of this video, you may never look at aging the same way again. His name was Walter. Walter was 72 years old. He lived alone in a small house in Ohio. Every morning looked exactly the same. He woke up late, sat silently at the kitchen table, drank cold coffee, and stared out the window for hours. The television stayed on all day, not because he enjoyed watching it, but because silence felt too heavy. A few years earlier, Walter's life had completely changed. His wife, Helen, had passed away after 43 years of marriage. His son lived in another state. His daughter was busy raising her own children. Friends he once laughed with every weekend had either moved away, become sick, or passed on. Slowly, Walter stopped calling people. Then people stopped calling him. And without realizing it, he began disappearing from his own life. One cold morning, Walter sat in his living room holding an old photo album. He looked at pictures of family vacations, birthdays, Christmas dinners, and summer barbecues. In every picture, he was smiling. But now, he could barely remember the last time he truly smiled. That morning, he whispered something painful to himself. "My useful days are over." And the dangerous thing about that sentence is this: once a person believes it, they start living like it is true. Walter stopped taking care of himself. He stopped walking outside. He stopped cooking healthy meals. He slept too much during the day and stayed awake late into the night, thinking about regrets. The more he isolated himself, the weaker he became. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. One afternoon, while checking his mailbox, Walter saw his neighbor Samuel watering flowers across the street. Samuel was 81 years old, walked slowly with a cane, and had recently survived heart surgery. But somehow, Samuel always seemed alive. He smiled often. He waved at people. He sat outside every evening listening to music. And something about that bothered Walter. How can a man older than me still enjoy life? He wondered. The next day, Samuel walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside Walter quietly for a moment before speaking. "You know what the biggest lie about aging is?" Samuel asked. Walter shrugged. Samuel smiled gently. "That growing old means growing useless." Walter looked down at his hands. For a few seconds, neither man spoke. Then Samuel said something Walter would never forget. "Your body may slow down with age, but your purpose doesn't have to." That sentence stayed in Walter's mind all night long. The next morning, something unusual happened. Walter woke up early, not because he had somewhere important to go, but because he could not stop thinking about Samuel's words. For the first time in months, he opened the curtains wide and let sunlight into the room. It sounds small, but sometimes healing begins with very small decisions. That morning, Walter decided to walk to the end of his street, just to the corner, nothing more. The cold air hit his face. His knees hurt after only a few minutes. Halfway there, he almost turned around. But then he noticed something he had ignored for years. Birds singing, children laughing in the distance, fresh morning air. Life was still happening around him. And for the first time, in a long time, he felt connected to it. That tiny walk became the first habit that changed his life. Every morning after that, Walter walked a little farther. At first, it was difficult. Some mornings he felt tired. Some mornings sadness returned. Some mornings he wanted to stay in bed. But he kept walking anyway. And slowly, something inside him started waking up again. His body became stronger. His mind became clearer. His sleep improved. But the biggest change was invisible. He began feeling hope again. One morning during his walk, Walter passed a small park where a group of seniors gathered every Tuesday. Some played chess, some exercised, some simply talked and laughed together. Walter almost kept walking, but one man waved him over. "Come join us," he said. Walter hesitated. After spending years alone, even small conversations felt uncomfortable. But finally, he sat down. At first, he barely spoke. He only listened. Yet, week after week, he kept returning. And slowly, strangers became friends. That became his second habit, connection. You see, loneliness is one of the most dangerous things for seniors. Not because being alone is always bad, but because prolonged isolation quietly steals joy, energy, confidence, and even health. Human beings were never designed to go through life completely alone. Walter learned that people do not stop needing friendship after 70. In fact, meaningful connection becomes even more important. One afternoon, while sitting in the park, Walter heard another senior talking about learning photography at age 76. Another woman was taking piano lessons at 80. Someone else had started volunteering at a food bank after retirement. Walter listened carefully, and suddenly, he realized something powerful. These people were not waiting for life to end. They were still living it. That night, Walter went home and opened an old closet in the hallway. Inside was a dusty wooden box he had not touched in years. Inside the box were painting supplies, brushes, canvas, old tubes of paint. Before marriage, before children, before bills and responsibilities. Walter loved painting, but somewhere along the road of adult life, he stopped. He stared at those brushes for a long time. Then he whispered softly, "Maybe I'm not too old to begin again." The next morning, Walter sat at his kitchen table and painted for the first time in over 30 years. At first, his hands shook. The painting looked terrible, but he smiled anyway, because for the first time in years, he wasn't just passing time. He was creating something. That became his third habit, doing something that gave his soul meaning. And this is important. Many seniors believe purpose only comes from careers, raising children, or earning money. But purpose can come from simple things: helping someone, learning something new, creating art, sharing wisdom, growing a garden, reading to grandchildren, cooking meals, encouraging others. Purpose is not about age. It is about feeling alive. Weeks passed, and Walter continued building small habits every day. Morning walks, human connection, creative time. Then, another habit quietly entered his life: gratitude. Every night before bed, Walter wrote down 3 things he was thankful for. Some days the list seemed small: a warm meal, a phone call from his daughter, a beautiful sunset, a good memory of Helen. But slowly, gratitude changed the way he saw life. Instead of focusing only on what he lost, he began noticing what still remained. And that changed everything. Because suffering often grows when people stare only at what is missing. But peace begins growing when people appreciate what still exists. One evening, Walter sat on his porch watching rain fall across the neighborhood. He realized something surprising. For the first time since his wife passed away, he no longer felt emotionally numb. He still missed her deeply. He still had painful days, but life no longer felt empty. It felt meaningful again. And the reason was not one giant miracle. It was small daily habits repeated consistently. That is how transformation usually happens. Quietly, slowly, one decision at a time. Months later, Walter looked completely different. Not younger, not perfect, but alive. His posture improved. His energy returned. His laughter came back. Neighbors noticed. Even his children noticed during family visits. One afternoon, his granddaughter Emily asked him a question while looking at one of his paintings. "Grandpa, why are you happier now?" Walter smiled gently. Then he answered, with tears in his eyes, "Because I stopped waiting for life to be what it used to be, and learned how to love the life I still have." And, honestly, that may be one of the most powerful lessons any person can learn after 70. Life changes. People leave. Bodies age, energy shifts, but meaning is still possible. Joy is still possible. Purpose is still possible, no matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how lonely or forgotten you may feel today. And if you are watching this right now, feeling like your best years are behind you, listen carefully. Your story is not over, not even close. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin after people think the book is finished. And Walter still had more to learn. A few months later, winter arrived in Ohio. The mornings became colder. The streets became quieter. Trees stood empty beneath gray skies. And one morning, Walter woke up feeling that old sadness again. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. For a moment, he felt afraid. Afraid that all the progress he made was disappearing. Afraid that happiness was only temporary. That day, he almost skipped his morning walk, almost stayed inside, almost returned to the old version of himself. But then he remembered something Samuel once told him. Strong people are not the ones who never feel pain. Strong people are the ones who keep moving, even when pain returns. Walter slowly stood up. He put on his coat, and he stepped outside. The air was freezing. His legs felt heavy. Every step felt harder than usual. But halfway through the walk, he noticed a woman struggling to carry grocery bags near the sidewalk. Without thinking, Walter walked over and helped her carry them to her car. The woman smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said. "Most people just walk past." Walter smiled back politely. But something happened inside him during that small moment. He realized another powerful truth. Helping others was helping him too. That became his fifth habit: service. Not grand achievements, not huge sacrifices, just simple acts of kindness. Walter began volunteering twice a week at a local community center. Sometimes he helped seniors fill out paperwork. Sometimes he served meals. Sometimes he simply sat beside lonely people and listened to their stories. And slowly, he discovered something many people miss their entire lives. Purpose grows when people stop focusing only on themselves. One afternoon, Walter met an 86-year-old veteran named Richard at the center. Richard had lost his wife, his brother, and 2 close friends in the same year. Yet every time Walter saw him, Richard smiled. One day, Walter finally asked him, "How do you stay positive after everything you've been through?" Richard looked at him quietly before answering, "Because every morning I still wake up with one gift." "What gift?" Walter asked. Richard smiled softly. "Another day." That answer stayed in Walter's heart. And from that day forward, Walter stopped treating mornings like burdens. He began treating them like opportunities. That became his 6th habit: starting each day with intention. Every morning, before touching the television or phone, Walter sat quietly for 5 minutes. He prayed. He breathed deeply. He reflected on the kind of person he wanted to be that day. Not younger. Not richer. Not perfect. Just grateful. Kind. Present. And over time, that simple morning routine gave him emotional strength he never had before. You see, many people believe happiness comes from changing external circumstances. But often, peace begins internally, in the way people think, in the habits they repeat, in the small choices nobody else sees. Then came the final habit, the habit that tied everything together. One evening, Walter opened an old notebook and began writing letters. Not business letters, not formal letters, personal letters. One to his son, one to his daughter, one to each grandchild. In those letters, he shared stories from his life, mistakes he made, lessons he learned, moments he regretted, moments he treasured. He wrote about fear, about love, about losing Helen, about learning how to live again after grief. Hours passed as Walter filled page after page, and while writing, tears rolled down his face. Because for the first time, he realized something deeply important. His life still mattered. His experiences still mattered. His wisdom still mattered. That became his 7th habit: sharing what he had learned. Many seniors believe aging makes them less valuable. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The world desperately needs the wisdom of older generations, their patience, their perspective, their resilience, their stories. A society that ignores its elders loses something precious. And Walter finally understood that growing older was not something to be ashamed of. It was something honorable. Months later, the community center asked Walter to speak during a local senior gathering. At first, he refused. "I'm not a speaker," he said nervously. But Samuel laughed. "You don't need to be a speaker," he replied. "You just need to be honest." The night of the event, Walter stood nervously in front of dozens of seniors. Some looked lonely. Some looked tired. Some reminded him of the man he used to be. Walter took a deep breath and began speaking. "A year ago," he said slowly, "I believed my life was basically over." The room became silent. I thought aging meant becoming invisible. I thought purpose belonged only to younger people. I thought happiness had passed me by. He paused, but I was wrong. People listened carefully. Walter spoke about the walks, the friendships, the gratitude journal, the painting, the volunteering, the morning reflections, the letters. Then he looked across the room and said something powerful. Growing older is not losing life. It is learning what truly matters. Some people in the audience began wiping tears from their eyes. Walter continued, "Yes, our bodies change. Yes, life becomes different. But different does not mean meaningless." He smiled softly. "Some of the strongest, wisest, kindest people I have ever met are over 70. The audience applauded quietly, but Walter was not finished. "If you are still breathing," he said firmly, "you still have purpose." That sentence filled the room with emotion. And in that moment, Walter realized how far he had come. Not because he became famous, not because he became wealthy, but because he stopped surrendering to hopelessness. That night, after the event ended, several seniors walked up to thank him. One man said, "You gave me hope." A woman in tears whispered, "I thought I was alone." Walter hugged them gently because he understood exactly how they felt. He had once stood in that same darkness himself. Later that evening, Walter returned home and sat quietly on his porch beneath the night sky. The cold wind moved through the trees as he smiled to himself. Life was still imperfect. He still missed Helen. He still had difficult days. But now, he understood something he wished he had learned sooner. A meaningful life is not built by age. It is built by daily choices. And no matter how old a person becomes, it is never too late to choose differently. So if you are watching this today and feeling forgotten, if you feel like your best years are behind you, if loneliness, fear, or regret has slowly entered your life, remember Walter. Remember that healing can begin with one walk, one friendship, one act of gratitude, one moment of courage, one new beginning. Because happiness after 70 is not about pretending life is easy. It is about refusing to stop living. Your age does not cancel your value. Your wrinkles do not erase your purpose. And your story still matters more than you think. Maybe life has slowed down, but your heart still carries wisdom. Your voice still carries power, and your presence still matters to this world. Never forget that. And if this story touched your heart in any way, take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need hope today. Because sometimes, one story can change a life. And maybe today, this story was meant for you.